going to go ahead and get started. Just so you do know, we will be having a question and answer session towards the end, and we will have a mic so you can pass it around because this event is being streamed live as well as recorded. I'm Paul Rickert. I'm a professor of criminal justice here at LeTourneau University. Also, we have my wife, Michelle Rickert, who is Dean of Admissions at Louisiana College School of Law. We have Jessica Mannon, who is representing Pure Justice and Pure Hope, and Traffic Stop, and a couple of other organizations, I think, this evening. And then we also have Norma and Bill Mulliken, representing Refuge of Light. So each of us will be taking a few minutes in turn. I will be taking the shortest amount of time and then turning it over to the real experts. But this evening, I wanted to take a moment and look at what happened with slavery in Western civilization. As I'm sure most of you know, throughout history, slavery was the norm. It was what was expected for most of the populations in all the great empires. Even Greece, that was the bastion of freedom and democracy, only about 10% of people really were actually free and actually had any say in the way that they were governed. It was the rule, slavery was. Everyone had slaves. The Code of Hammurabi even had numerous laws detailing how you would go about having indentured servants or actual slaves. It was common for victors in battles to enslave those who were vanquished. It was common even during the time of Jesus Christ, while he walked the streets of Jerusalem. But what happened is that we see that as Christianity spreads, there's a slow, gradual change, a change in the understanding of the value of life. The basic Judeo-Christian doctrine that men and women were created imago Dei, or in the image of God, is what gave rise to much of this. So as that idea that we are created in the image of God spreads, as Christendom does, there we are, technical glitch here. We see practical changes emerge in the culture. Consider the familiar Greek city-state of Sparta. While certainly it's an extreme example, the underlying philosophical framework of the value of a person was common. A baby that was born with a defect would typically be left outside to die of exposure. We find in Platonic thought the concept that the world was primarily non-physical and hence relatively unimportant. And this also undergirded much of the philosophical thinking during Jesus' day, except in that little troublesome region of Israel. While compassionate acts certainly occurred in regions and in other faiths other than in what we would now see as Christendom, Christians began to systematically act in ways that really made no sense to those holding to other faiths, as they would take compassion to those who were less fortunate, as they would minister to the sick and dying. They would rescue those babies who were left at the mercy of the elements. And they would slowly begin to change the dominant culture. Centuries later, we see hospitals emerge as an expression of the love of Christ in society. We see the value of work emerge, as previously in human history, work was seen as something that nobody wanted to do, and we wanted to force it on other people on our behalf. Sometimes history does seem to repeat itself as well. But work from the Christian perspective even happened in the garden before the fall. We see property rights also emerge. We see it in the basic Christian tenet, thou shalt not steal, and other rights as well, as intrinsic to the nature of the law of God. With this came the realization that the political realm, the state, was not all-powerful, and that people have inalienable rights. The church begins to carve out a sphere where the state is not all-consuming, as it had been in most other civilizations. We also see the emergence of labor-saving devices. And since the Christians in general began to get rid of slaves, they needed to have labor-saving devices. Before that, they didn't need to. And while the record in Christendom is neither perfect nor unblemished, the church has been a magnificent force for good in the world. We see some of these assumptions working their way into the culture when St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, challenges Emperor Theodosius. Theodosius had slain 7,000 people in Thessalonica in 390 AD as vengeance for an incident that happened with one of his commanders. Theodosius goes to take communion one day, and St. Ambrose refuses him admittance to the church. Now, this sort of standing up to an emperor, that did not happen previously in this way. So we see the church starting to carve out its niche within society. Eventually, Theodosius submits to the authority of St. Ambrose, acknowledging that he is not superior to the church, and he acquiesces. He spends months in repentance, in sackcloth and ashes, and speaking out about what he had done on the steps of the church. We also see it dramatically in 404 AD, with the spectacle surrounding the end of gladiatorial games, when an Egyptian monk named Telemachus steps down onto the sands of the arena, begging for them to stop this fight to the death. According to church historian Theodoret, quote, "The spectators of the slaughter were indignant and inspired by the mad fury of the demon who delights in those bloody deeds, stoned the peacemaker to death. When the admirable Emperor Honorius was informed of this, he numbered Telemachus in the array of victorious martyrs and put an end to the impious spectacle," unquote. Over time, as the substance of the Christian message impacted culture, according to sociologist Rodney Stark, slavery essentially disappears in Western civilization. That he estimates at around 8 or 900 AD. Now, it is replaced with serfdom, which is not freedom as you and I understand freedom, to be sure. But it is not chattel slavery either. They could choose who they wanted to marry. They could go where they wanted to go. They did have days of work that were owed. They did have to do military service and things of this. But that is a major difference than chattel slavery. So, again, around 8 or 900, it's replaced with serfdom. And we typically do not hear this in the slavery story. Then we see in 1215, Cardinal Stephen Langton standing up with other wealthier noblemen to oppose King John's tendency towards totalitarianism with the signing of Magna Carta, who tradition says that Stephen Langton actually wrote. We then see the slave trade between Africa, England, and the Americans that begins again in the 1500s. This is a regression historically and non-Christian theologically. William Wilberforce, inspired by his Christian faith, is able to secure the cessation of the slave trade with the passage of the Slave Trade Act of 1807. But it isn't until the Abolition Act of 1833 that it's actually abolished altogether under law. Parliament even paid £20 million to the former slave owners. That was 40% of that nation, of the UK's budget that year. 306 years after the slave trade began in the 15th century, a war begins in the United States, at least in part related to the issue of slavery. President Lincoln, in his second inaugural address, using familiar Christian language, if I can get the slide up there, please, harkens back to the psalmist David. He says, "Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that the mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondsman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Lincoln did effect some real change in the United States, but the change is not one that we might anticipate. There are always unintended consequences to government actions. It's a basic economic truth that when there's demand, supply will be there. And when supply is high, prices are going to be typically lower. And while making chattel slavery illegal had the impact and the legal sphere of saying we no longer will permit this, there was still demand. It drove it underground, which actually makes it harder to detect and harder to deal with in some respects. So we might say that the end result of the Civil War was that slavery was no longer legal and public in the United States. To say that it ended slavery would actually just simply be incorrect and naive. So why is it important that we're here this evening? Some of you are aware of the myriad forms that modern slavery takes. Others of you have seen movies like Memoirs of a Geisha or Taken, or perhaps even the newer Rachel Weisz film, The Whistleblower, which is a real-life story of a Nebraska police officer who uncovers United Nations peacekeeping officers, diplomats, and military soldiers who were involved in large-scale human trafficking in Bosnia and Herzegovina during the 90s. On a side note, this is the same fallen nature that we see in that instance that caused our founding fathers to insist on limited government, one of the specific expressed powers. As Lord Acton wrote, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the nature of our governmental structure with the separation of powers in these three separate but co-equal branches, it can be often very frustrating to work with and within, especially when we see that laws could be passed to strengthen the ability to investigate the crimes that are related to human trafficking. We could increase investigator capacity to deal with the most egregious offenders. We could simply pass a law, perhaps, to fund aftercare homes and for education. But that's not how our founding fathers set up the process. So it can become very tedious, and it requires some real determination to accomplish some of these tasks in the arena of dealing with human trafficking. William Wilberforce fought Parliament for 26 years over the issue, and it was 53 years that he fought before he saw slavery abolished legally. And that was 3 days before his death. Tonight we'll look at human trafficking and modern-day slavery from several perspectives. We often speak of justice, often it's in the negative. And sometimes, I submit, we take an approach that's akin to what Justice Potter Stewart said in his concurring opinion written at the U.S. Supreme Court of Jacob Ellis versus Ohio in 1964, dealing with defining pornography. He says, "Hardcore pornography was hard to define, but I know it when I see it." Taking an "I know it when I see it" approach to justice is fraught with issues, not the least of which is the subjectivity of that type of analysis. People have differing standards on these sorts of issues that stem from their culture, their faith, their predilections, even their vices. So what is justice? Well, International Justice Mission founder Gary Haugen says in his book Just Courage that injustice is defined in the Bible as the abuse of power by taking from others the good things that God intended for them, namely their life, liberty, their dignity, or the fruits of their love and labor. In other words, when a stronger person abuses his or her power by taking from a weaker person what God alone has given to that weaker person, God judges this as sin. Simply not doing an injustice, though, is not the same as doing justice, is it? I would like tonight to try to build a category in your mind. Consider that justice and injustice exist on a spectrum. Injustice, in the extreme, might be taking conscious and definitive acts to take away those good things that God offers. It's also found in systemic forms when injustice becomes the norm in a society or culture. We then have neutrality, A neutral person along this spectrum might be a person who doesn't intentionally seek to harm others. This, in many ways, is where the Ten Commandments sits. It says, don't go beyond this point. Thank you. It says, don't go beyond this point. They tell us, don't cross this line or we tread into sin's territory. Also, oddly enough, this might be where we generally find conservative libertarians. I would suggest that this generally limits our founders, the limits our founders place on government is to not harm others. But simply not being unjust or harmful to other people is not the same as being a just person, is it? Just as a person chooses to act in specific good ways towards others, even when it's costly, it is the opposite of injustice and the opposite of sin. It is in many ways the gospel of Jesus in that we offer something to people that they don't deserve, and we do it intentionally, willingly, and knowingly. God's justice is tinged with both mercy and grace, and ours should be as well. And while we all may not dedicate our lives and careers to tearing down injustice in the world and in its entrenched and perverse modes, we should all be strongly committed to doing justice in our own lives and relationships. And the right thing is not simply abstaining from the wrong thing. It's intentionally doing righteous acts towards people. And Jesus sums it all up in Matthew 5:43-48 when he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Now, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our first presenter for the evening. The first presenter got her bachelor's degree in government from Liberty University. She attended law school at George Mason University and has interned at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, worked for a boutique intellectual property firm on Park Avenue in New York City. She clerked for the presiding judge of Kent County, Delaware. She helped Liberty University found their law school as an assistant dean. She also developed a Western legal traditions program while she was a professor at the university, which focused on legal philosophy and constitutional law. She has been managing editor for the Supreme Court Economic Review at George Mason University School of Law for 10 years, founded a nonprofit in Virginia, which is a coalition that sought to work together with other organizations and agencies to help pass laws, including writing laws, to facilitate investigating and dealing with human trafficking issues. She also lobbied the Virginia legislature with students. She spoke before 2 House of Delegate subcommittees in Virginia, and she is now the Assistant Dean for Admissions at the newly formed Louisiana College School of Law in Shreveport. She's already actually written some legislation in Louisiana as well that's before their legislature this term. She's lectured at Oxford University, the University of Nebraska, Regent University, the Virginia Commonwealth University, and events all around the country. More importantly, she's the mother of 3 wonderful kids, Jacob 10, Sophia 8, and Chloe 6. It's my pleasure to introduce you to my wife, Michelle Rickard.
The United States is a beacon, a magnet for dreams. People want to come here because they dream of a better life, a job to feed their kids, and the Holy Grail, an education. Sometimes their very dreams make them vulnerable. Despite the promise of this land, sometimes dreams are used to trap people. This is their story. This is a surveillance operation in the strawberry fields of northern San Diego County.
I count about anywhere from 10 to 15 girls.
The officers think these young girls have been trafficked into the United States from Mexico.
The traffickers are very manipulative. They'll lie to them, promise them good jobs, but once they get over here, they find themselves being forced into a prostitution.
For the girls, the United States is a dream gone wrong. In minutes, they've changed from typical schoolgirl clothes into miniskirts and high heels. A lookout appears to give the thumbs up. Migrant workers leave a nearby parking lot, headed toward the girls. Some sort of exchange is made. One of the girls follows a man into the bushes. They have sex in plain view.
They're brought into the United States and they're basically, kept captive. It's modern-day slavery what's going on.
Slavery is about one person controlling another person using violence, or maybe the threat of violence, paying the person absolutely nothing, and then using that situation to exploit them economically, to make money off them.
Kevin Bales is one of the leading experts in the world on modern-day slavery and co-authored a study on slavery in the United States. He reports there are 27 million slaves in the world today. At least 10,000 of them live in the United States.
We've got way too much slavery, even if we've got a handful, and we've got thousands. They've been brought in from other countries, from all over the world, because they're poor, they're often desperate for work, they're vulnerable, and they're doing all kinds of different things. They're being used in prostitution, in agricultural work, in domestic service, working in people's houses.
A coalition of 40 agencies on both sides of the U.S.-Mexican border in Southern California work together to free slaves, bust traffickers, and to prevent trafficking from happening in the first place.
To the traffickers, the children, they're expendable, reusable, and resellable. And that makes them a priceless commodity.
But there will be no bust or rescues on this day. It's too risky.
It's just about losing the victims. Just say we do go rush on right now. They have their lookout. They're going to see us way before we even get close enough. What if we lose all the young girls? We may never find them again.
If you've always lived in freedom, it seems reasonable that slaves could just kind of walk out in a free country like America and find themselves a policeman and say, help me. But they don't speak English. But they're terrified of the police because they've been told over and over that the police are going to arrest them and attack them and maybe torture them. They don't know where they are. They're very often locked in. They're in shock. Now put yourself in that shoe and you'll find, well, this is kind of a hard thing to just walk away.
100 miles north in a suburb of Los Angeles, Maria Suarez knows what the girls in the strawberry fields are going through.
When I was a little girl, I saw my parents working hard, my dad, my mother, and my dream was to one day become somebody, have money and give them the best of the life, treat them like king and queen.
Maria grew up on a farm in Mexico. In 1976, she came to the U.S. legally to live with her sister. Maria didn't speak English. Her 16th birthday was just a few weeks away. A woman Maria met on the street offered to find her work.
She told me not to tell my family that she was coming very soon. And to me it sounded good because I said I'm going to surprise them with a job. But it was not a job. It was just a trick, a trap that I fell into.
The woman took the naive young girl to this house.
So when we got there, I met this man. He was an old man. Probably he was in his 65 or 70, I don't know. The house was like creepy. I didn't want to stay there. They keep telling me, you stay here, you meet my wife, because he had a wife. And then I take you to your house tomorrow. I didn't want it, but between them two, they convinced me.
Much later, police would report that the man was an old lecher who claimed to be a brujo or witch, and that he had a history of buying young girls from Mexico and trading them in when they turned 20.
At the third day, it's when he told me that he had bought me, that I was his slave, that he paid $200 for me, that I was there to do whatever he wanted to do to me.
Maria says he told her he could read her mind and that he would kill her family if she tried to leave the house.
I was afraid of him. I was terrorized by him. He beat me, raped me. Every day he abused me mentally, physically, emotional, spiritual, because I was not in touch with my family. I was not in touch with people because I was afraid of him.
Years went by. Dreams disappeared. Only fear remained.
The only thing I felt was fear. Fear all the time. So I figure God has forgotten me. I used to ask God, why did you forget about me? I'm your child.
Her family called the police several times. Officers investigated. They didn't do anything about a minor living with an older man.
I was so afraid that he was going to kill my family that I told the police that I was fine. I was okay.
It's a coercive, physical and mental control that becomes like a chain around your brain and you can't walk away.
5 years passed.
At the end, I was just living. Okay, one more day. As long as I can last, either he's going to kill me or I'm going to die.
It's hard to believe it could get worse, but it did. The man enslaving Maria was killed by a neighbor.
He killed him, and I hear the noise. I came out. The victim was on the floor, on the ground. He told me to grab the stick and to put it under the house. I did that. He gave it to me on my hand, and I did it.
Maria and her neighbors were arrested for the murder.
To make a long story short, the criminals that actually committed the crime on the property blamed Maria for everything. Maria was not in a position to adequately defend herself. Battered women syndrome and the types of injuries that Maria had endured while a slave on the man's property were not well understood.
Decades later, Charles Song would take up Maria's case, but Maria's attorney at the time was fighting drug charges of his own.
In addition to that, this was his first criminal defense trial, much less felony defense trial. So she also had extremely inadequate representation.
He promised my family that I was going to be free by Christmas. I never got free. I was sentenced with 25 to life.
For a long time, Maria thought the man whose name she will not say and doesn't like to hear would somehow come after her, even though he was dead.
It's important to understand that, if you or I were to suffer an attack, say, to be mugged on the street, we might get bashed over the head, but that traumatic event, like a car wreck, it's over in 20 seconds. Their trauma, their horror lasts day in and day out, week in and week out for years. When they come out of those kinds of situations, they have to work hard at trying to rebuild their own mental health.
Slowly, behind bars, Maria freed her mind.
I choose to use my time productively. I choose to be a better person.
She started to be a mentor for younger prisoners. She was your model prisoner. She took college classes while she was in prison, and she ran counseling groups and therapy groups.
Maria got her GED and worked in clinics helping other inmates.
I had a family who, every time that I did something good, that I shared my good experiences, they were very happy. That was my payback.
Finally, in 2001, the Board of Prison Terms investigated her case.
They were wanting for me to say, yes, I did this, I did that, but I was not going to say anything like that.
The report concluded that Maria suffered an extreme level of torture and that it's a tragedy that she's still imprisoned after all these years. Maria's co-defendant said she hadn't even been involved with the murder.
And now that she served the time that she was convicted for the crime that she did not commit, then she gets released and you think, well, maybe now she can get on with her life and live with her family.
It wasn't to be. In 2003, after 5 years in slavery and 22 and a half years in prison, Maria was paroled, but she was not free.
Because of this wrongful conviction, immigration is required by law to remove her from the United States, to deport her from the United States. So she was taken directly from the Chino Institution for Women to the San Pedro Detention Center.
Charles is the legal director of CAST, an organization dedicated to abolishing slavery and trafficking. He hoped recently passed anti-trafficking laws could be used to keep Maria in the country.
One of the things that really just sticks in my mind that she said when I first interviewed her that day is that all she wants is a little bit of justice.
I told him that I felt I just want somebody to listen, to believe in me, and to know that I've been telling the truth, and just a little bit of justice. That's what I told him.
And of course that kind of became one of my mantras during her case, is that she's just asking for a little bit of justice, and that's the least that I could help her try to attain.
And I really believe in him. I knew that he was going to do something.
Maria had already been ordered deported when Charles won a T visa for her.
It's essentially a visa for victims of slavery and trafficking in the United States that cooperate with law enforcement, that are here on account of the trafficking, and that would face extreme hardship involving severe unusual harm if they were returned to their home countries. It permits her to travel with permission from the government. It also permits her to work in the United States legally.
Maria spent 5 months and 7 days here. In 2004, after almost 28 years, she was finally free.
All right. Before I get started with my presentation, I wanted to tell you 3 things. The first thing is that you may feel a lot of different emotions during these presentations. At some points, you might not feel like you can handle all the information that's being thrown out at you. You might feel that it's a little bit too much. That's okay. We're just going to be telling you the truth, the facts, the way it is out there. But at times, you might feel kind of excited, kind of that well of excitement, like I can do something about that. You might be happy. You might be excited. You might be happy and excited, and the person next to you might be crying. And that's okay, too. So don't worry about your emotions during these presentations, okay? Second thing, if you like what you're hearing, I'm going to be going really fast through my presentation so that I could show you that video of Maria and Maria's story. As an attorney, Maria's story is one of those things. I'm pretty callous to most things. I've seen it all before. I'm married to a detective. I've worked in a prosecutor's office. But Maria's story infuriated me to the point where I was pounding my fist, and I couldn't believe that this could still happen in the United States. But if you like what you see in my presentation and Maria's story, LaTourneau has just been approved to have a human trafficking track, and they're going to be having human trafficking courses online, a domestic side and an international side. And these are newly approved. I will be writing these courses shortly. I've taught courses in human trafficking before, and they've gone very smoothly. And you're going to hear more anecdotes in those classes, like the fact that I've been in communication with Maria through Kevin Bales, who set that up. Maria was going to come to a fair we had last year, but there's some things with her. She can't get out of her job very easily because she depends on that salary to be able to come and things like that, and that's a very big dependent for her. And lots of other anecdotes like that you would hear more of in the classes. So And she's doing really, really well. And she actually speaks to groups of people about what happened to her now as an abolitionist. So I want to tell you that as well. So we're going to talk a lot about things. And my third thing is, of course, I can't cover everything in about 35 minutes. Oh, my third thing I really want to tell you is we will be having a break right after I'm done. So woohoo! Look forward to breaks. Okay. Now we'll start the PowerPoint. Through the Looking Glass. Finding and freeing slaves at the state level. Would I really title this as the ugly truths of modern-day slavery? When Benjamin Skinner, some of you guys have read his book, first was told by the former ambassador that modern-day slavery was the #1 issue in human rights in these days, he decided he was going to go down to Haiti and see if he could find a slave. He's a reporter, and see what's going on. And he came with this quote after going to many, many countries, and he said in his book, he thought this was a big issue, but he couldn't find any slaves. Then he said, once you find one, you will find that there are millions. They're all around us, yet they are the invisible people that toil around with no recognition. He went to Haiti and bought somebody for $50 in the course of about 3 days. He has a big story, and it's a crime so monstrous. You can get the book if you're interested in it some more. Oh, by the way, I don't believe in re-victimizing people, so all the photos that you see are all my sister. She is both the photographer and the person in the photography. So, no, I don't use any, people from other countries or anything like that in any of my PowerPoint presentations. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of these common misconceptions about what's really going on out there. I also know that some of you guys are really advanced and might know a lot about that, and I'm going to be redundant for you guys, and some of you guys are really new to this and don't know anything about what's going on. So I'm trying to weigh that a little bit as I'm going forward. Misconception number 1. Of course, that was cleared up a little bit earlier with my husband's introduction, that slavery was a problem of the past. Here's the truth. If you actually look at the numbers, there is estimated to be 27 million. That's a pretty conservative number. It was actually a number we've been using for a long time now, for about 10 to 15 years now. We've been using about the same number. And the reason why is because if you're a slave, you're not going to get in a line to be counted. It's very hard to figure out what the real number is of people that are held in modern-day slavery. We think in India alone there's close to that. So we're not 100% sure what the real number is. All we know is it's very, very big. And if there's just one person in slavery, there's one too many. By comparison, during the transatlantic slave trade, it was estimated there was around 10 million slaves traded. So a modern-day slave is, of course, it's not about race, as it was in the past at times. It's about vulnerability. Vulnerability is the key to slavery. They look for someone who's not going to fight back. Those who are the most vulnerable to become enslaved, things like children, displaced people, people where there's natural disasters happening. Anywhere you see a natural disaster, there's people that are trying to exploit the people that are part of the natural disaster, whether it happens on American soil or it happens on other soil. Because if you think about it, there's all these displaced people. They're all in refugee camps. No one knows, especially whose child belongs to who. And it's very easy for a slave trader just to come in and start grabbing who they want, right? Especially the vulnerable people. So it's very easy. And of course, those who lack economic options, where they go to those people who lack economic options, especially people in like Moldova, where there's not very much economic options out in the country land. I had a former colleague who had written on this, and I've also written on this area as well. And he would say that in certain areas, there's no women. Because what they would do is they would send all the women out to work. The women were supposed to be working in nice restaurants, is what the people that would come and, pitch the sale of goods to them. And then, of course, what would end up happening is once they took them out of Moldova, they would put them in a brothel in the Netherlands, where prostitution is, of course, legal. And they say that they're all willing. So, as I said, vulnerability. So it cuts across everything that you thought you knew. We have runaway and homeless youth, which I'll get to in a little bit, marginalized groups, poverty, victims of abuse, women and families in debt. There are more women and children in slavery than men. Displaced people group, and I always use even Hurricane Katrina and those types of groups. They found lots of people doing that. Also, temporary contract workers in other countries will tend to pick up on people because they promise higher wages, and since they're American or Canadian or German or whoever they are, of course they would pay you higher money. Why wouldn't they? And then they don't pay when they come over there. And of course, our supply chains are tainted, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, so what types of modern-day slavery do we see? What most people think of is just the forced prostitution, but that's not the only type we have. We have debt bondage. Those are like restaurant workers, nail girls. There's been several cases in the United States of Vietnamese or Korean nail girls who have been promised they pay their way over here, they promise that they'll pay a certain amount of their check, and then they'll be freed at the end. But they just never get freed at the end. Then, of course, we have maid services. We have forced labor. Of course, you can see the forced labor. I'm just going to touch on child soldiering for a minute just because of what's in the news right now. Just so you all know, child soldiering doesn't only happen in Africa. It happens in Afghanistan, in Burma, in Iran, even though they say it's volunteer. I don't know of any 7-year-old that volunteers to go fight wars, but it also happens in African countries, but in Sudan, in Somalia, in Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Ivory Coast, and Sierra Leone. So there are many, many, many countries where child soldiering happens, and child soldiering is one of those push buttons for me because when I first learned about child soldiering, I had a child, my son, who is the apple of my eye, and he's definitely a mama's boy, and he was 6 going on 7, and I had just met a man who was now a man, but he became a child soldier at 7, and he was ripped from his village and forced to murder his whole entire family in order to initiate him into the child soldiering life. And that's one of the areas that's the most difficult for me to deal with. So I just wanted you to know, given all of everything that's going on now, there are many places that this happens, and there are different things you could do about it, but there's lots of places that you can do it at. Forced prostitution. Of course, the former Soviet bloc, they go over there and promise them modeling jobs, then bring them here and all over the country. Also, they get into Nigeria and promise them there. Then, of course, there's the American girl looking for a Coach bag in the mirror in the mall. And then some seemingly nice boy says, I'll give you the moon, I'll give you the stars, and lures her away. And then, then it progresses from there until they are in their grips. So prison labor is one I'm not going to touch on later on. This is mainly in China, where they are reformed by their work in prisons. The way they are lured, I'm just going to touch on these ever so briefly because I want to get to the stuff going on in Texas. I do talk fast. So ways victims are lured, most of the time they are not abducted. That is the least common way that anyone is lured, because it's not very easy to keep a victim that's been abducted quiet and submissive, right? So more than likely, they're not going to be abducted. It's going to be one of these other ways. Most of the time, it's deceit or fraud. So they tell them they're coming for something else. I have a job. I sat there and listened to the testimony on the floor of the House of a beautiful woman who grew up in a Christian home. She was 20 or 21 years old when this happened to her. She was a freshman in college or a sophomore in college when she was asked to be a salesman for makeup. Her parents said, I don't want you to be a door-to-door salesman for makeup, but I love makeup. And she was this beautiful girl, and she grew up in this Christian home. And they said, we really don't want you to be a makeup salesman. And she goes, but Daddy, please just let me be a makeup salesman. And so they decided to let her be a makeup salesman. And so she went to her first job interview. She filled out an application. Looked completely legit. She gave them an application. They said, well, we'll let you know if you get the job. She waited. It was about a week. Then a week later, she got the job. They said, you got to come to the next interview where you do training. That didn't feel right. It ended up being in a coffee drive kind of barish area. There was another gentleman there, and she didn't feel comfortable there. So she went to go to the bathroom. When she went to go to the bathroom, they went back there with chloroform and then took her to a van. Her family didn't hear from her for about 2 years. Her family was writing her notes. They would make her write notes back. Didn't see her. Finally, they took her to her family's house and said, you go into your family's house, show me your face. I watch your brother, and I have a sniper on your brother. If you do anything, I will kill your brother. You come back out so they know you're alive. This went on for 6 years until she finally had the nerve to run and tell the police. Because they had told her they would kill her parents, kill her little brother if she ran. Who is going to do that? They had her in a brothel this whole time, moving her from place to place to place. She never knew where she was. She never knew how she was going to get a cab. She had to give all of her money to the people. So she was on there saying, it's not just these runaways. A lot of times it's runaways, but it's not just runaways. It's educated people that grew up in a good home that can sometimes be duped. Of course, so we have lover boy syndrome. What the lover boy syndrome is, they pretend like they're your boyfriend. They will come up and pick you up in fancy cars. And they do this in different countries. They do this if you've ever watched the Lifetime special, you'll see it in there. There was a Mexican case where the mother was involved. He actually went as far as to get her pregnant. She gave birth to the baby. Then he took her to America and put her in a brothel and said, if you do anything, we'll kill your baby back at home, which was half his baby. So that was a lover boy. That case was prosecuted, and the mother actually got in jail time, and they extradited her, and she got jail time as well. They will do this to especially runaways. It takes about 48 hours for a child who is run away from home to get picked up by a pimp. The average age of entry into prostitution is 13. So you do the math. And so a guy comes up in a fancy car and says, I love you and I want you to be my girlfriend. And they just ran away from home. They don't have any money. What are they going to do? And then he goes, can you turn a few tricks? We need a house, or we need this. And she does it because she loves him. And then, of course, it turns into seasoning and everything else that moves around from that. Sale by family member. This happens a lot in other countries where they will sell small children into rug, where they make rugs in India and places like that. Most of the time they're not selling them because they don't like them. They're selling them because they think they're giving them a better life, think they're giving them more education on the international side. On the domestic side, we heard about this with the Chandra think it's Chandra Davis now. It's been several years. It's actually the opening of my one of my articles I had published, where her mother allegedly sold her child to her boyfriend for drugs. We hear that a lot. Mothers selling their own daughters for drugs and drug usage. So that's why sale of family member. You think it wouldn't happen, but it does. They're also moved around all the time, especially when big sporting events like Super Bowls, things like that come up. They're moved around overseas. They're moved around to different countries where they don't know where they are. Okay, so the U.S. has a federal law against human trafficking, which is very, very good. Just got re-upped this past year. Federal has a good law. Why do we have to have a state law? Well, the truth is, the reason why we have state laws against human trafficking is because of an overworked criminal justice system. And the biggest issue with all of this is that we're not detecting enough. So that's the biggest issue, is that we're not having enough detection of these people in order to make a big difference in the amount of people that are being trafficked. I'm skipping through this a little bit fast because I'll tell you a reason in a minute. The federal sex trafficking crime of a minor means that any inducement of a child to engage in commercial sex act is human trafficking according to the federal law. So you can't plead that you didn't know she was under 18. You can't plead anything. They are victims, and they're always seen as victims. It is not always the case in most states. And again, I'm going through this quickly for a reason. I don't know if all you guys are hometown Texans, but if you're not, here are some of the reasons why states should have strong laws. The Constitution says we should, the catalyst of community awareness, and a variety of other reasons, filling gaps in the state law and the federal law as well. Filling gaps in the federal law is always a good thing to look through. It also provides more training and things like that. But Polaris Project does a ranking system of states generally on your laws, and you'll see that it didn't pick up. Okay, now it did. Texas is green, and that's good because that means you are doing what you're supposed to be doing in accordance with your laws. That you're listening to NGOs, you're trying to enact proper laws, you're trying to enact proper training. You even have a mandatory training for your officers. And when my husband and I met with another police officer here in the local area, they wanted even more training because they understood the more they could understand what a victim would look like, what a perpetrator would look like, the more they can actually make a difference, right? So there is still laws that we can pass. There's still some little gaps there, but overall, it's good as a state law. Secondly, this is just one of those cases that it had to pass through here, this area. This is a huge case. It shows you the power of state laws. This was picked up as we were going through. 400 Thai citizens have been working on farms. So they are farm workers. But look at all the states they went through as they were working on these farms. 12 states before they were finally picked up. And all those states, if I were to just flip back to the map, you'll see they have very, very, very weak state laws on human trafficking. And so their officers had no idea what to look for. And you can't rely on the federal officers because there's only like 1 or 2 per jurisdiction. So you can't rely on the federal officers, and they're mostly overworked as well. So you can't rely on the federal officers. The state officers had no idea what to look for. And so they just passed through for... and it's actually a longer period of time, but that's the period of time that they're actually getting them for because they can actually trace it. But they had admitted through court documents I've seen that they were here for a longer period of time. Okay, so the final misconception is that children under 18, the idea of victimhood. Who are they, victims or are they not victims? And some people are not sure whether or not they should be victims or should they be tried as prostitutes. So the issue is, truth is, even in Texas, children under 18 are considered prostitutes. And they enter the life into 13. Now, you have good laws for getting them off the streets. You have good laws for arresting the Johns. It's the little low penalties. You have good laws, and you can actually save them. There's an affirmative defense law. I can't get into all the details of the laws, but they're still considered victims. So there's a few things that, I just kind of say Texas addresses this, that you don't have to prove coercion, that they were coerced into it. You just have to show that they were doing it, and they are considered victims. But the problem is there's a stigma there. So there's a debate right now what we should do and how we should do this. And there's no reason to rush to judgment. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. So a lot of states are trying different things. And I think it's a good idea to wait to see what happens in those states before we rush to judgment as to how we should do it here in Texas. But one of the ideas is decriminalization of young girls involved in prostitution. Say they are not prostitutes. They are victims. Because if they had had consensual sex with the man over 18 and they were under 18, they would be considered a victim and the man would be considered a perpetrator of statutory rape, right? So, but if they're here, they're considered a prostitute who has now been forgiven of her prostitution because she was a victim of the man. You see the kind of nuance there? So that's one thing we could do. They're trying it in some states right now, 3 or 4 states. We can see what happens in those states. Another way they do it is using the Ohio method. And there's this one judge, and I had the honor of being able to sit under him and hear the Ohio method right from his mouth, and during a big lecture. And what the Ohio method does is he hears all these cases. He actually hears all the prostitution cases too. And then what he does is he adjudicates them as not guilty, but they go to a home. And then they go through this intensive process because these people, like these children, they can't go back home. Most of them ran away anyway. And they can't go in the foster care program. I mean, they've been with 100 men a day. What are they going to do in the foster care program? I mean, think about that. I mean, I really want to let that set in. What are they going to do in the foster care program? And they're not going to be 18 for a number of years. So, and I also, like when you see a prostitute, regress her. Hey, like look at her and regress her down to a 13-year-old because the average age of starting into prostitution is 13. So whenever I see a prostitute, I think of a 13-year-old girl that she was when she started, more than likely. And then when you see the mugshots, if you can Google this too. Where the mugshots of when they started, and they're all fresh-faced 13-year-olds, and then where they stopped because they've been addicted to meth, because they addict them to whatever they can to keep them under their control. They're normally all sunken face, and you can see the toll it's taken on them. How do you rehabilitate after that? You have to rehabilitate on so many different levels. On the drug level, on the reintroducing into regular society. You have to understand their language. Because if you don't understand their language, you would be giving them things that they wouldn't want. They call things different things. There's this really great book called Renting Lacey. It's very graphic, but it's very good. It's put out by Shared Hope. You can buy it off their website. Normally it's for a donation of about $5, but it actually has what the lingo is in the front of it. And it talks about Lacey, who is an underage girl, and what happens to her. So you understand the lingo, and then it takes about 2 years for someone to go from prostitution to being able to actually give back to society. They say somewhere between 2 and 5 years. And that's the kind of commitment we need. And that's what our last speaker is going to be talking about, is how homes can deal with that and how counselors can deal with that. Okay, these are just some high-profile cases that happened a few years ago. These are other things that you'll see that masquerading as, they're actually brothels, but escort services, things like that. Korean massage parlors, those type of things. If you ever see bars on the outside of these buildings, bars on the outside of the doors, lots of locks and things like that, very tall fences around. Anything where it looks like someone's living there, those are all signs that something is amiss in the home, and you should look into it, or in the business, and you should look into it a little bit further. And by saying you, I don't mean you personally should look into it. That is never, ever a good idea for you personally to look into it further. There's a national hotline, the Polaris hotline, and I'll see if anybody has it to give to you. It might be on one of our phones. I typically give it out whenever I do these lectures, and I normally get everybody get their cell phone out and give out the hotline so that you have it with you. But there's a national hotline that you can call, or you can just call the police. And if it's nothing, it's nothing. It's no big deal. But if it's something, you've just saved some lives. There was a gentleman up in Alexandria. His name is Lewis Cameron, and he just noticed there was a girl living in his cousin's house that hadn't been living there before. And finally he asked her, he's like, do you go to school? Because she wasn't going to school. He just noticed there's a girl not going to school. And then he realized that he was using her as a child slave just to do the housework and things like that. He ended up rescuing 3 other girls, and those girls worked through another organization that does lots of really great lectures and lots of really good work. And they actually went in and rescued these 3 girls just because a guy had a hunch that something was amiss. He saw a girl that wasn't going to school with the rest of the kids. You see that with the child recidivex in the Haitian community. There will be one child that won't be going to school with the rest. Normally a little bit smaller than the rest, normally a little bit less vital looking. And what's interesting about that, that's what they do in Haiti. It's completely normal. It happens all the time. But they've imported that culture here. And I actually had a student who was a former restivac, but she didn't realize she was a restivac as in Haiti. Her father sent her with her to live with her stepmom, and her stepmom let her kids go to school and eat normal food, and this girl was forced to eat out of the garbage can and couldn't go to school and had to do all the chores and everything else. And then she came to the United States, and it was only after the United States, after a few years, her father came, and that's kind of common. Her father came to visit and saw what was going on that got her out of it. And she didn't realize what happened was illegal to her until I took her to a conference, and it was a long conference kind of like this, and Laura Lederer talked about children in this restivac situation, and I found her crying in the bathroom, and I was like, what's the matter? And she's this beautiful girl and wants to be a lawyer now and to help fight this, and wants to take over Haiti too, but that's okay. Rule of law in Haiti, and we're very good friends now. And she said, I just realized that everything they did to me was not right and was illegal. I always knew that was not just, but I didn't realize it was not legal. So sometimes they themselves don't even know it's not legal, that what they're doing. They think that they've somehow brought it upon themselves. So you have to fight that even. So the final thing is, there's nothing I can do about it. And many of you might be thinking, she just gave us a whole bunch of stuff, and that's a lot. That's a big, big task, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about this. Well, the first thing that you can do about it is use your gifts and talents and what you can bring to the table. We don't need everyone to be out here giving speeches as abolitionists. We don't need everyone to go and start nonprofits. We don't need everyone to do the same thing. Just as you all have different gifts in your given profession, you all can do something different in this fight, and we need you all to do something different in this fight. Maybe you can give a little time as a web designer. If you're a web designer, all of us nonprofits, all need web designers. Every single time, we have needed a web designer. And if you knew how many times I've been like, man, I wish I hadn't had a web designer now. I mean, web designers, you can give some of your graphic image time, web design time, graphic imaging to help us with some of our brochures to make us look more professional so we can bring in some money. Maybe you have money that you could give to a nonprofit at some point in your career. Maybe you want to be a nurse and you end up going overseas and you do one of those medical missions trips. And that's one of the prime time when they bring their slaves to get free medical attention. And I told my doctor that, who always brings he does medical mission trips all the time, and he had never thought about the fact that they might be bringing him a whole bunch of slaves. You can buy jewelry. There's a whole bunch of companies. If you are an entrepreneurial type, this company is called Nightlight. And what it does is it works with women. Remember I said, who's going to hire these women? For the last 10 years I've been a prostitute, so that's why I don't have any work history. But now I want to work. Who's going to hire them? Maybe you can hire them to be your secretary. Maybe you can start a business where they make jewelry. See, that's what this is from. They make jewelry. You could go buy your jewelry from one of these businesses like Nightlight or some of the chocolate. Did you know that up until recently, every single bite of chocolate that we ate was manufactured at some level with slave labor? More recently, it's gotten much, much better, but it's still pretty bad. They tried, but it's still pretty bad. So there's lots and lots of things you can do, but we can talk about those during the intermission.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. We're going to take about a 5-minute break so you can hit the restrooms. We'll have some bottles of water, some sugary candies to help you get energized for the last half. And then we'll reconvene right back in here. Please don't bring any of the candy or water into the room here, if you would. That's what the Belcher Center has requested of us. So I'll meet you right out here, and I'll have some waters to give out and things like that if you like, all right? And we'll be back here in about 5 minutes and get underway again.
It's such a beautiful story. I'm face to face with the King of Glory. You rescued someone unworthy. I know this is love. I breathe your fragrance, taste your goodness, crumble to pieces into your love now. In your presence, all my existence crumbles to pieces into and change your story. At your name, angels will bow, the earth will rejoice, your people cry out. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name, oh Lord. There is no one like our God. We will praise you, praise you. There's no one like our God. We will sing, we will sing. There is no one like our God. We will praise you, praise you. There's no one like our God. We will sing, we will sing. There is no one like our God. We will praise you, praise you. Jesus, you are God. We will sing. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name. Lord of all the earth, we shout your name, filling up the skies with endless praise, Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name, oh Yahweh, Yahweh. We love to shout your name, oh Lord.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if there's anyone outside the room that can hear my voice, we are about to start.
A star is lighting the ancient sky. The angels sing out their song tonight. You've come at last. God, we need your strength to fight, your light to guide us through the night. You're our only chance.
Ladies and gentlemen, just for the sake of time this evening, I did too much of an introduction for my wife, and now I'm going to do a short introduction for our next speaker. Jessica Mannon has driven here from Dallas this evening to be with us. She is representing Pure Hope and Pure Justice, which are ministries located both in Dallas and Ohio. That's right. So if you would, please welcome Jessica Mannon. Thank you.
All right. Well, hello. Thank you for bearing with us and coming back after the break. I know that Wednesday night's a precious night of studying and sleep for most of you college students. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you about Pure Hope, but specifically Pure Justice. Pure Hope and Pure Justice was founded way back in the 80s, used to be known as the National Coalition for the Protection of Children and Families. If you can say that 5 times fast, come see me afterwards. So they rebranded in 2010 to become Pure Hope to really get across their vision better, which is a world free of sexual exploitation and brokenness, with the practical mission of providing Christian solutions in a sexualized culture. Pure Justice is a sub-program of Pure Hope that is designated specifically to the issues of trafficking and exploitation. So the idea is that you have these issues of injustice, of exploitation. Who should be on the front line? The church. But who doesn't want to talk about it? The church. So that's really what the purpose of Pure Hope and Pure Justice is all about. And they actually have an internship, college students, if you're interested, and it's paid. Don't tell them that I told you that, but that's always great. And you can mobilize yourself on these issues. So if you like what you hear, come see me. I'll tell you more about it. I participated in the internship in 2010 as I was finishing up my degree at Hardin-Simmons University, as some of you might be familiar with. We're better in sports. You laugh. At least soccer. I don't know about the rest. Anyway, in my journey to become passionate about this issue is an interesting one. I was a political science major who was bent on attending law school and did a legal internship, and it was a lot of research, and I was like, where is the firebrand change stuff? What's going on? This is not as fun as I thought it would be. Well, research is a part of it, as I've come to learn now that I'm in the real world, but there's some other things that I'm passionate about there, and it may result in me going back. But what I did realize is, okay, I'm passionate about these issues. I'm passionate about change, but the law itself, by itself, is not going to change this. So the next summer, I did an internship for the Baptist General Convention of Texas in something called the Christian Life Commission, focusing on hunger and poverty. Very, very nonprofit ministry side. And realize that this is really important and this is really valuable, but that by itself isn't going to fix this issue. And then I found the Pure Justice internship, which joins the legislative legal angle with the ministerial and nonprofit angle. And together what you can do is create change from the ground up by mobilizing a people of faith who are also educated. And so that's where I found myself, and that's the message I want to share with you today. So we'll go ahead and watch the video. Y'all can go ahead and go on to that.
Sex trafficking is perhaps the most barbaric injustice of our time. It is the most brutal form of modern-day slavery.
The only thing more shocking than the nature of this injustice is its scope.
It's estimated that there are as many as 2 million sex slaves globally.
Experts believe
between 100,000 and 300,000 children and teens are trafficked into
prostitution and pornography every year in the U.S.
It's an issue of supply and demand for commercial sex in the 21st century is seemingly insatiable.
There's consensus in the anti-trafficking movement
that the normalization and proliferation of pornography is a driving force behind the explosion of sex trafficking. We live in a culture that commodifies human beings and exploits for profit both the consumer and the commodity.
The dominant attribute
of such a culture is bondage. It's well recognized that Christians are at the forefront of the anti-trafficking movement. What's problematic is that many in the Christian community are contributing to the demand for commercial sex. If we're not pursuing personal purity that flows from a desire for justice and righteousness, then we're like the whitewashed tombs Jesus described, clean and respectable in appearance, but inside full of selfishness and injustice. Pure justice is our vision for the church becoming a city on a hill shining justice and mercy into the darkness of exploitation. The Pure Justice internship is key to that vision.
I didn't even realize that there are people being trafficked in our very own country, driven by the demand for commercial sex.
Yeah, I understand now with the Pure Justice internship that the church accomplishes change by each person choosing to live a life of purity and justice.
right, so confession time. I know you all think you came here to learn about the bad guys over there, what the bad guys are doing, how they're so bad and you're so good for sitting here in this seat. But we're not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about you, and I'm going to talk about me. And we're going to talk about the things that we do that make this situation worse for millions and millions of people around the world. Things we do every day that we think are no big deal because we're Americans and we don't feel the pain of it, actually tighten the shackles on so many of these victims we've heard about. But to begin, we first need to understand what God thinks about this because, well, we are the people of God and we care about that. And so let's talk about what God thinks about exploitation. Go back to the... So we've got a few verses up there. The one I want to focus on is the Hosea verse. It says, "And it shall be like people like priests. I will punish them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. They shall eat but not be satisfied. They shall play the whore but not multiply, because they have forsaken the Lord to cherish whoredom wine and new wine, which take away the understanding." And it continues, "I will not punish your daughters when they play the whore, nor your brides when they commit adultery, for the men themselves go aside with prostitutes and sacrifice with cult prostitutes, and a people without understanding shall come to ruin." Now, there's two reasons I use this passage. First, in a culture that kind of looked the other way when a man committed adultery but would sentence a woman to death in seconds, God clearly holds the man accountable in this passage. The second thing we can gather from it is, okay, so you see the man as a passive participant. He's not out there prostituting himself like the woman is. But that's the point. We as the church may not be out there practicing these acts. You may not be trafficking someone. But if you are a passerby or you are standing passively while this continues, God cares. He cares a lot. So that means, Christian, just because you don't participate, it doesn't mean you don't need to repent. So now that we talked about exploitation, let's look at justice. The dictionary said it's the quality of being fair and reasonable. Okay, that's true. That's great. That's not the whole thing. I like this quote below that says, "Justice is a mode of action, while righteousness is a quality of the person." So, okay, you might be a little better informed with what righteousness is. So if you are a righteous person, the things that you do, the actions you make that make you righteous, that is justice. And I think that's a good baseline definition to use. But let's talk about what God says about it. Well, God is justice. According to these passages on the screen, the Lord loves justice. He leads the humble in justice and executes justice for the orphan and widow. Righteousness and justice are the foundations of his throne, and the works of his hands are truth and justice. He will not be disheartened or crushed until he has established justice on the earth. Okay, wow. So what does God call his people to? He calls his people to be just. More than that, he demands it. We are to, again from the verses, do justice to the afflicted and destitute, to do good, seek justice and reprove the ruthless, and to let justice roll down like waters. We are not to disregard justice and the love of God, but to exercise it with joy. So what does that all mean? I don't have the time to do it, but if I were going to delve into any passage, and if you were going to take anything away from this speech, write this down and go home and meditate on this passage, because I think here you find God's heart on this issue. So what you have is the people don't understand while they're praying and they're fasting and they're going to church and they're doing all these religious activities, and God's not hearing their prayer. And it's God almost mocking them, saying, "Is this the fast that I've chosen? I'm not listening to you because you've missed it. They're doing all these great things and they missed it." But he clarifies here his view or his calling. Is this not the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, and to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? That's what we're called to. And again, take that home, if nothing else, that passage. So, how does this tie to trafficking? Well, it all gets down to the normalization of commercial sex. That's a term. You can go look it up. It's a really important term. But really what we're looking at is 50% of Christian men and 20% of Christian women view porn on a regular basis. And so the injustice of the commercial sex industry is not resisted and opposed, but rather perpetuated. So what does pornography have to do with trafficking? Well, first let's look at its prevalence. I'll just read them off the screen. 12% of internet sites are pornographic. Every second, $3,075.64 is being spent on pornography. Every second, 28,258 internet users are viewing porn. 40 million Americans are regular visitors to porn sites. 1 in 3 porn users are women. 70% of men aged 18 to 24 visit porn sites in a typical month. In the U.S., internet porn pulls in $2.84 billion a year. The entire worldwide porn industry is worth $4.9 billion. 2.5 billion emails per day are pornographic. 25% of all search engine requests are pornography related. That's 68 million a day. 34% of internet users have experienced unwanted exposure to porn, either through pop-up ads, misdirected links, or emails. And there are 116,000 searches for pornography every day. And the saddest one of all, the average age at which a child first sees porn is 11 years old. The reason this is an issue is it's very easy for us to sit back and not think that we have any effect on what's happening in trafficking and exploitation. But in fact, you do. And this is, I think, for the typical middle-class American, this is your area of impact that we can really change it. But I know some of you are sitting back there and going, why is porn bad and what does it have to do? And I'm still not connecting the dots. So we'll talk about that. So first of all, porn is trafficking. Some types of pornography directly are the act of prostituting women and children in the form of trafficking. The production of pornography actually perfectly matches the definition of trafficking. It's basically the obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act with force, fraud, and coercion. Many women that I have both spoken with and listened to their testimony who have emerged from a life in the porn industry talk about that. In addition to their shoots, they also have what's called a private session. So you have this super fan that they'll fly you across the country so that fan can have a private session and live out their fantasy, which is prostitution. Next part is debt bondage. Many women in the porn industry are actually being held by a debt bondage or by force and coercion, much like Michelle talked about earlier, where, oh, well, as soon as you pay this off, you can go free. Problem is, oh, you need to get your hair done? Well, we added that. Oh, you got an STD and you had to go to the doctor? Well, we added that. Oh, you don't want to do this? Don't worry, there's heroin outside. Go shoot some up, and then you'll be ready for this hardcore scene. It happens over and over again. The Global Centurion reported that 25% of traffickers who were arrested were recording and producing the rape, sodomy, and abuse they were performing on children. This percentage is higher if you include those who had pornography on them, and what that means is the only ones they counted were the ones that, okay, there's the kid and there's the picture. They didn't count the pictures the traffickers had that were probably of children that they had already sold to another trafficker or had died or had been killed. The Department of Justice and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children both recognize that pornography is an element that adds to the serious problem of sex trafficking. Many traffickers are found with filming equipment and cameras to create and sell pornography. But I think the most telling quote is the one that was on the screen, if you want to go back to it. It's by Lexington Steele, porn producer and performer. I find myself not that much unlike the slaves and slave traders of some 400 years ago. I participate in the most heinous of all crimes, the buying and selling of human flesh. I trade my own flesh for monetary compensation, and I sell the flesh of others for the same. And then there's the Poppy Project in the UK. Women actually reported that they had photos taken of them while they were undergoing a gang rape, and later the clients could stop on by and buy the pictures if they wanted to. And if that's not trafficking, I don't know what is. Next, pornography is actually used to train women and children on what they ought to do in a brothel. In a survey of trafficking victims from 9 different countries, over half of them said that porn was used to train them on what they were to do in the sex trade. So I want you to imagine that 13-year-old girl Michelle talked about earlier. She's been taken from her family or bought from her family because her family thinks she's going to have a better life. She has no knowledge of anything except her childhood, and to train her on the exploitation that's going to happen in her new life, trafficker pops in a American-made pornography video and says, "Act like that woman and you'll be fine." Besides these things, pornography creates and provides a rationalization for exploiters as to how and why their sexually deviant behaviors are acceptable. These things normalize prostitution and trafficking to more freely allow people to participate in them. Pornography is not only trafficking, but it's damaging in many other ways. Pornography uses 6 lies to subtly ruin your life, your marriage, and to render you useless for kingdom work. As you believe these lies, you contribute not only to your own destruction, but to the shackles that continue to imprison millions around the world. So, what's commercial sexualization and pornography do to you? Big porn lie number 1. Don't laugh at my big porn lies, I like them. But number 1 is you're not harming the woman. That woman wants to be there. Look, listen to her. That's what she says. I want you to listen to this quote from a porn producer. "I was the first to shoot Rocco." Rocco's a porn performer. They're good names. "Together we evolved towards rougher stuff. He started to spit on girls, a strong male-dominant thing with women being pushed to their limit. It looks like violence, but it's not. I mean, pleasure and pain are the same thing, right?" End quote. Shelley Lubin, a born-again Christian woman who has given her life now to eradicating the production of porn and to helping the women who want to escape it, was actually a performer and a prostitute in the 90s before she found the Lord. And she interviewed an ex-producer of Hustler magazine. He was one of the lead producers of Hustler for 7 years. And she asked him, "Were any of the women ever coerced or forced into doing acts they weren't comfortable with?" His reply was, "All the time. You have to remember, in the studio's eyes, women are nothing but meat. They are literally slaves with the illusion of fame and fortune, but take it from me, they are not free moral agents in most circumstances. They are guided by habits, physical violence at home, or they are struggling to make payments on a mortgage. Nobody goes into this business for the fun of it." Big lie number 2, porn is not changing you. "I'm just the same. I haven't changed. I'm normal. No one can tell." No, yes, it's changing you. Yes, it is. It is. First of all, it desensitizes you. According to a well-respected publication titled "The Social Cost of Pornography," even those of us who make no use of these services, pornography, experience the cultural effects of saturation, as ordinary television, respectable magazines, and popular songs regularly include provocative images, situations, and lyrics that a generation ago would have been labeled as soft porn. Reports from those who have looked describe what counts as hardcore today in terms that would astonish the imagination and shock of the conscience of anyone who is not a hardcore pornography user themselves. That leads us to big porn lie number 3, that you can quit at any time. Pornography lets you believe the myth that you are in control while subtly sucking you in. Sure, it's easy to believe that because you hold the mouse and you're at the keyboard and you're oh so carefully listening, so if anyone comes down the hall, you're going to be really, really quick with that mouse. You're in control. You're not. You're lying to yourself. Pornography is progressive. What may begin as a small pet pleasure or habit, you validate by telling yourself that you're in control and you're not hurting anyone, and at least you're not doing this for real, will become a compulsive, uncontrollable addiction that will not only drive you into a deeper reliance on pornography, it will develop into an insatiable thirst for the more intense and sadomasochistic. British writer Sean Thomas, in a widely read article published in the London Spectator in 2003, wrote about his own pornography addiction and talks of his descent into the consumption of imagery that would have once revolted him. And he concludes by saying, "The net had, in other words, revealed to me that I had an unquantifiable variety of sexual fantasies and quirks, and that the process of satisfying these desires only led to more interest. Most alarming, perhaps, is that many clinicians and researchers on this topic have reported a very real slippery slope from using pornography that contains adults into using pornography that contains children." And I don't have the time to get into it here, but I actually just read an article this week. A study was done on inmates who had been convicted for the possession of child pornography. At the time, 40 of them had admitted that they also had acted out deviantly on children, so they had sexually abused children as well as had the pornography, and the rest of the 155 denied it. They then went through a stringent therapeutic process to help them cope with the crime and understand what they'd done, as well as to heal. And by the end of the study, all but 15 confirmed that they had actually worked or they had actually abused a child hands-on. And the thing that scared all of them, they said, all this started with was a little bit of porn. And then it became hardcore. And then that didn't do it for me, so I started with the kid porn. And then I thought I could control it, and I couldn't. And then I abused children, and the average perpetrator had 19.4 victims. So if you think that you can control it, you can't. Big porn line number 4. It won't hurt my marriage. Or, I heard this one, it makes our marriage better because we watch it together for ideas. False. Since it looks like we got about half married, half not, looks like in this audience, we'll keep it pretty brief. The General Social Survey recently assessed the impact of pornography on marital well-being. The report said, among individuals who have ever been married, those who report having seen an X-rated film in the last year are 25.6% more likely to be divorced, 65.1% less likely to report having a very happy marriage, and 13.1% less likely to report being very happy with their whole life in general. And then in a study that assessed divorce lawyers, they polled them and asked what were the contributing factors in all the divorces they handled. They said that 56% of the divorce cases involved one party having an obsession with online pornography. Hold on, we lost a page here in the middle. You wouldn't want to miss it. Big porn line number 5. Everyone's doing it. My friends do it. I mean, it's normal. Individual responsibility is not diminished by the commonplace of sin. Your friends, your culture is not the standard. Just because, well, Jimmy's over there and he's doing it, he seems fine. Jimmy is not the standard. That's like a serial killer going, well, I'm not Hitler. I'm good. Look at Hitler. He's bad. Hitler's not the standard. Jimmy is not the standard. Jesus is the standard. And anytime you deviate from what he calls you to in holiness, you need to repent. You're not good, you're evil, and you're creating demand. And lastly, the biggest lie of all, it's about you. It's not about you, it's about God. And the biggest lie that pornography wants you to believe is that it's about you, because then if you think it's about you, you play into all of those selfish pleasures and all of those selfish desires, and you can validate just about anything. It's not about you, it's about God and God's will to see his captives set free. And every time you watch pornography or you stand by while someone in your family or in your relationship watches it, you know what that does? That pays the people who are keeping these people in chains. And it tells them that people really want this stuff. This is lucrative. I can continue it. I mean, come on. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry a year. There's demand for it. These things are not a part of God's call for the believer, because instead of viewing men and women as created in the image of God with dignity and inherent worth, a sexualized culture views them as objects to be bought and sold for the pleasure of others. Instead of viewing a sexual relationship as something sacred and complex union of a man and woman, within the protective and permanent boundaries of marriage, a sexualized culture views it as brief, shallow, and selfishly motivated use of one person whose body and interest are subordinated to the other. Instead of teaching men and women to respect women as fellow human beings who are equal in worth, A sexualized culture conditions men and women to view each other as sexual commodities. Instead of honoring and esteeming women, a sexualized culture devalues them and pressures them to present themselves as sex objects. Instead of protecting the most vulnerable among us, the sexualized culture trains young people to exploit others and to tolerate their own exploitation. These things grieve the heart of God, and the more we contribute to them, the more women and children will continue to fall prey to traffickers and predators around the world. So what do we do about it? We repent. Now, I know this topic isn't popular, and I know it's like really awkward that I'm talking about it right now, but it needs to be talked about. It is the reality. And the thing that we need to do to make this better, the first step is repenting. We need to begin to practice the justice that God causes people to. You won't be empowered to help and serve the victims of exploitation and trafficking until you stop contributing to the demand that keeps them in shackles. I don't care if you bought 20 Coney 2012 action kits. If you are still adding to the demand with pornography or something else, you're not doing anything. You will never be equipped to help these victims of trafficking the way that you should until you start practicing justice yourself. But remember, there is hope. So statistics would say that there's people in here who this is a very real issue or has been a real issue, or it's an issue for someone close to you. This is not the end. The beauty of the Christian life is not that you do everything perfectly. That's why I said that Isaiah 58. It's not about being religious. It's not about being perfect. It's about continual repentance and getting back up, and true justice and continuing to seek justice even when you fall flat on your face. So if you need resources, if you need help, I'm sure Paul's got some great resources. I've got some brochures I can give you, but there is hope and there's someone who can help you. And if you're sitting there and you're like, I can't do this, I've tried this, I can't quit, I've tried, that's the best place you can be, is to realize you can't do it on your own, because then you're on your way. So beyond that, we do pure justice, hence the name. So we pray. We must devote ourselves to prayer. We must pray that victims of sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation will be freed from their bondage and provided comfort, hope, and restoration. We must pray that their oppressors are prosecuted or become lawyers ourselves so that they may terrify no more. And we must pray that we and our loved ones be empowered to seek justice and be protected from the snares of the unjust. Secondly, we need to understand. We are stirred with a sense of urgency to seek justice when we are confronted with the reality of injustice. Therefore, we must do the hard work of investigating oppression and understanding it so that we may effectively oppose it. When we understand what trafficking is, where it happens, why it increases, and how victims suffer, just like you're doing tonight, you are compelled to act, and I hope you will. Knowledge of God's justice, righteousness, and compassion for the oppressed enables us to persevere in our actions, and it keeps us from despair. That means what you're listening to tonight is probably very heavy. For me, when I started, it grieved my heart. But what I had to realize is the most equipped people in the world to take action on this issue are the believers, because they have hope in a Jesus and a Christ who is coming back to make it right, even though everything they do may not make it right. Our hope is in Him. Next, resolve. In a sexualized culture, we must resolve not to be consumers or collaborators in exploitation. We cannot effectively or in good conscience oppose the injustice of trafficking, prostitution, and pornography if we are partaking in it. Selfless love, not self-gratification, must define the words and deeds of the just. If not, hypocrisy will lead us to ineffectiveness, derision, and demise. Moreover, to achieve in this endeavor, we have to support one another. This is not something you can do by yourself. This resolve can only be maintained and strengthened in community. Trusted relationships to provide accountability and encouragement are required to continue faithfully down this rigorous path. And lastly, then you're ready to engage, which is to love in word and in deed. Only after we've been enlightened and strengthened through prayer, understanding, and resolve are we ready to engage effectively to create change for these victims. Day by day, moment by moment, we must take little steps that will help to create big freedom for those who are around us. Some days, for some people, that may involve directly caring for victims of sex trafficking, prosecuting the traffickers, or raising awareness. But most days, for most people, it will mean loving their spouse, protecting their children, respecting others, controlling their impulses, guarding their steps, and educating those around them. This type of engagement may not end up on a documentary on the Discovery Channel about the guy knocking down brothel doors in Colombia, but it can and it will change the world. If you're looking for some practical steps to do this, we've got a white paper that explains these kind of issues so you can take it to the person who decided not to come tonight and go, hey, read this is really great, or at least show them the video. The internship is available to you college students, to you adults in the room. We have a small group Bible study that we have created to do with the group so you can honestly address this issue while opening the Word of God and start to get it on the table for people who may not be so comfortable talking about it. And we're actually in the process of creating a sermon series for churches where they can pick it up and adapt it for their congregation and actually preach about these issues from the pulpit. Very excited about that. And so it's in these ways, and you can get a little banner here with the internship you can look at, if I can get to it. There it is. In these ways, we can faithfully walk, and while we may not be on a documentary, we will change the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Now I'd like to invite Norma Mulliken and her husband Bill to come up and talk about what they're doing with Refuge of Light, an aftercare facility that they are constructing here in East Texas.
First, I'd like to tell you, I'm looking out across the room and I see people all different ages. And earlier in the program, it was brought up, what can you do? What can you as one person do? I'm here to tell you, one person just doing your part ends up being a lot. About 3 years ago, God called my husband, my daughter, and myself to open a safe home for these girls that are being rescued out of child sex trafficking. At that time, we had no idea how to do that. So we started praying. First of all, our first question was, you're kidding, right, God? I mean, you're kidding. You called us to open a safe home, and we know nothing about this. How's that possible? But the Bible tells us God doesn't call you to do anything that He doesn't equip you to do. So we started praying, and we prayed that we would know how to open a safe home, that some way there would be a way for us to get the training that we needed. Well, 3 years ago, there was no training. We looked, we started just doing research on every home that was out there, all 6 of them. And we just didn't know where to turn. I started writing down everything about the homes that were opened and thought, I'll start calling the homes and asking them if they can help. Well, God being God, one of the homes, the one that we felt the closest, that they were doing closest to what we would be doing, when I called them, they said, we're going to start a mentoring program. God's been leading us to do this. Why don't you apply? So we applied, and we were 2 across the United States. We were one of the 2 across the United States that was accepted. There was our answer to prayer. We started a 2-year mentoring program learning how to open a home. So God answered that prayer, and He's been faithful ever since. We started praying about getting our license. When you start talking about caring for minors, the state gets very picky, and they should be. You're taking these kids to a home, and you're trying to give them everything they need. So we started praying again that God would show us how to get our license. We made a phone call to Buckner International, We started meeting with them, working with them, and 1 year later we signed a 3-year agreement with them. They'll be licensing us. They have a very good reputation. So I've said all this just simply to say to you, if God calls you to do this, He will equip you. I promise you He will, because we felt so overwhelmed in the beginning, and sometimes we still do. These girls that will be coming to us come to us with so many problems. Their abuse starts when they're little for the most part. That's a common thread with girls who've been trafficked, is that sexual abuse started in the home. So you're looking at a child that by the time we get her, she may be 11, 12, 13, that has been abused since she was a small child. These are scars that are so deep, and it's not just mental, it's emotional, it's physical sometimes, it's spiritual. These children are so wounded, and to think that we can put them back together in a short period of time is just not, it's not going to happen that way. It'll take years for these girls to get the counseling, the therapy that they need. Our home will have counselors. We'll do on-site schooling, and we have battled the state over that, but I think we're winning that battle. The girls have been truant for so long by the time they're trafficked that they're so far behind in school that it's just not feasible for them to go to public school. So we'll have an alternative accredited school on site. We'll have our own teachers. The girls, I sometimes think about Humpty Dumpty. You know, he had a great fall, but he did get put back together. And I think of the girls that way. They've had a tremendous fall. And they're in many pieces. Their lives are in many, many pieces. But we can put them back together. But they'll have to heal in every aspect. And that's, we don't want to shove God down their throats. We think that if they see God in us, if they see God in their teachers, their counselors, the people that they're around, if they see the Christian community step up and build this home for them, they'll have a prayer garden where that'll be listed, all the churches that come forward. This is what they need. They need to see God. They need to see that God is real. These are children that have been lied to their entire lives. They need to know what the truth is. They need to know that people are real and that people, there are good people. There are people who do what they say. There are people who are loving. There are people who are kind. But these are children that have never seen that. So we have to show them that. We used to raise paying horses. And one thing that I learned raising horses is that when they're born, when the colts are just a few hours old, you can go in and you can grab that little colt. And you can hold that colt, and that colt will struggle and struggle and struggle. But if you don't let go and you let that colt wear out, you have imprinted that colt forever. From that period on, that colt, no matter how big it gets to be when it's a full-grown horse, will remember you holding them and that they couldn't move. This is what happens to these girls. You won't find this in any book, but this is what happens to them. Early on, they couldn't make choices. Early on, they were forced to do horrible, horrible things. They had terrible things done to them. Then a pimp comes in and does the same thing. He forces her to do things. He threatens her with torture, and he backs up what he says. It's not just threats. This is a way of life with her since she was small. People will always ask, why don't they run away? Why don't they do something? Why do they stay? That child has been imprinted. I believe that totally. If you're an independent person, if you're a strong person, sometimes it's hard to understand these girls. It's hard to understand why they don't leave that life, why they don't run away. But see, they don't know they can. They don't realize they can. And a lot of times they can't. But even when the opportunity is there, they won't. They're not strong enough. They remember being controlled since they were a small child. But I know that these girls can be helped, and I know that we can help them. I know that we can teach them what they need to have a whole life all put back together. We'll teach them life skills. We'll teach them to cook. We'll teach them to be children all over again. They didn't have a childhood. That's one thing we want to give back to them. Where this home will be built, the land has been prayed over. We have prayer walked this land. When these girls come, they will feel God's healing power. I know they will. And this is how they're going to be restored. We can teach them. We can give them a high school education. We can mentor them past the time they leave us. We can help them find a job. We can help them go to college. We can teach them to play music. We can teach them about art. But only God can truly heal these girls. And we plan to give them God. It's our belief it's the only way they can walk away and be successful in life, be whole. It's already proven that lots of times these girls end up being mentors to other girls in this life. They go on to become lawyers. They go on to become social workers. They go on to become counselors because they know what this life is like. And they know it's going to take people with compassion and love to make a difference. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's about 8:13. We have a few minutes for some questions with our panel. We've got a microphone up front here, and I believe I see another one over here. So if you've got any questions that you'd like to pose to our various panelists, we'd love to field those now.
I can tell you that the home will be in East Texas, but because of security for the girls, we don't tell the location of the home. Sometimes the pimps or traffickers are still looking for the girls, so for their protection, we don't give the location away, but it will be in East Texas. Well, this year we're in a capital campaign. We're raising funds for the home. So hopefully we'll start building at the end of this year or early next year.
Did you bring your checkbook? We can start tomorrow. Just get it out. That's all it takes is money.
Anyone else? There has to be a few pressing questions out there. Okay. Yes.
So everything that I mentioned in my presentation is going to be at purehope.net or purejustice.org. The Bible study's up there. The video is the one I showed here. There's also additional resources, some counseling and recovery things. They have lots of constituents all around the nation, even if their particular group isn't here in Longview. So it all should be there. I see you have the exploited piece. You can find it.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, if you would allow me to just close us in prayer, we will go ahead and dismiss for the evening. Our Lord God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the presenters that have spoke this evening. We thank you for the interested people that have come to hear about this issue, for some of them to have their knowledge and their commitment buttressed, others to perhaps hear about this issue for the first time, Lord. And I just ask that as you seek to draw people to pursue justice, Lord, in their personal lives, that you would also motivate them to work for your justice in their public lives and in their various communities, their homes, their churches, and this great nation of ours, Lord, as well. So we just thank you for this opportunity to be here this evening, and we give you all the praise and all the glory for anyone who has learned anything this evening or any lives that have been changed, Lord. And we thank you for this. And in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any other questions, please feel free to meet the speakers out by the tables near where we had the water and the snacks. Thank you.